We're now live.
Good morning.
So it's June 8th, and we're ready to get started here with just dive into a key concept. By the way, I'm Sharif Yunus. I'm here with Dr. Kevin Majors. And we want to talk today about mastery. So Kevin, what is mastery? It's one of our core concepts of optimal work. And I know roughly, okay, mastery means being good at your job or getting really good at what you do.
Yeah.
How would you kind of flesh that out or explain it?
So I think mastery is what it looks like to make your work into something that's crafted like an art. So it means that when you work, it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, I think, means that when you're working, you don't have to think about each individual step that you're doing, but you know the sequence so well. It's like you're using strategies that you've practiced so that everything just unfolds naturally and you kind of just get drawn through. So I think mastery is when you aren't having to so deliberately think about each thing. It's like if you're learning to play a piano piece. In the beginning, you have to work on each of the individual sections until you get the muscle memory. But then eventually, once you've mastered the piece, you don't have to think about it at all. Now you shape it at a much higher level. So I think mastery is kind of inexhaustible. It always allows for more shaping. But it means that you're just making it better and better every time you do it. And there's something about when you've really mastered how you do something, I would say almost no matter what it is, you love doing it. So if you've mastered, painting fences, then you love painting fences. There's something about working with mastery that makes any task noble and beautiful.
So then it connects very closely to the concept of ideals, where just to have a few one is that mastery is itself an ideal. It's inexhaustible. That's one of the features of ideals that we often talk about, is that you can always grow more and more in them. So mastery is like that too. You'll never, so it's in many ways, it's not like you reach a level and you're like, okay, now I have mastery, but it's something that you're always growing in. And then the other aspect is that, you're shaping your work according to ideals. So there's another connection with ideals. So it's mastery is what enables you actually.
And mastery keeps you focused on your process of working. So you're not afraid of failing, because failure is really just about outcomes. And so if you're working from a position of fear, like a fear of failing, then you're always going to be comparing yourself to other people to see where are you in the, the office hierarchy and so you're going to be worried more about what people think of you because you're focused on the outcomes of your work. If you're a student, you're worried about the grade you're going to get. So focusing on outcomes means having fear. So, and outcomes aren't directly under your control, but mastery in a sense is. So mastery is how you practice getting good at something. And the more you think about how you're going about your process of working, then you're opening it up to real mastery. And you get excited as you're improving at it. And so you're going to be less and less focused on outcomes or that kind of content, and more focused on the process. And you're going to actually have a lot more joy that, if you focus on outcomes, you might occasionally get a joy of a good outcome, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's kind of fear. But once you start to love how you work and getting better and better at your way of working, then you get joy actually all through your work. To me, that seems to be the best way of working, one that gives you constant joy.
Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome to me. So how do you get it? I mean, what if I want to become a master at software engineering, or I'm sure you deal with many people who want to become in the mentoring program, who want to develop mastery in their studies, or the psychiatrists in residency you train at Harvard. Then how do you help them to gain mastery?
So I think that To really grow in mastery, you have to think about how you're going about each kind of task that you do in your work. And then think about what are the steps and how are you shaping them. So mastery means that your attention is on the process and you're breaking down the tasks that you're doing into its component parts. And then you're trying to shape how you do each of those parts. So like when it comes to my work as a therapist, I had to learn how to do different types of interventions. You know, how do you guide someone through mindfulness of an emotion if they're really struggling with an emotion in the session? Okay, that's just something you practice. But now it's like a definite thing, and that's what I would teach the residents that that I work with. You have how to guide them in the right way to do that, so that they get very good, and they now feel like, okay, this is something I can do really well. And then you extend it to doing different types of exposure exercises, and those exposure exercises can get more and more kind of expert level, because they've mastered the individual steps that go into how to do them. And so the nice thing about mastery is just taking a strategy and practicing it until it becomes second nature. So, and now you've acquired that kind of strategy. And then you have higher orders of strategies and you get better and better at doing them. I think like a master chef, right? That, you could say that the chef would be focused first on how to prepare each individual kind of dish, but then it's more about bringing them all together into like a beautiful medley. So that, and then you work at the level of the whole meal and you start shaping the experience of the whole meal. So it's less about getting this one soup right and getting this salad right. And it's more about how everything goes together. That's what mastery allows you to do. You take whatever the big thing is, you break it down into steps that you learn how to practice and get really good at. So the essential thing of mastery starts with order. Order is this ideal by which you master the art of breaking down tasks into steps. So order is itself a kind of mastery of breaking things down so that you can then arrange them into the right series of steps that you're going to do. So instead of just cleaning your room, you put order into it by thinking, how would I break this down into all of the steps that go into it? And that's where you then can forge a strategy. That the example I always use, start at the top and work your way down.
Yeah.
So you then do the corners and and then you do the paintings or pictures, and then you do the shelves, and you keep going down until finally you vacuum the floor. And that just becomes your way of doing it. You can get so good at doing it that you don't even have to really plan or think about it eventually, because it's just second nature. And then that frees you to focus on the next level of refinement of what you're going to be focusing on. You've kind of learned how to get through it. It's the same in any kind of sport you're learning. First, there's a broad overview, and then you start focusing on components.
Yeah.
The other thing is that once you've broken the task down into steps, which is such a crucial thing to be able to do well, because that allows you the next thing, which is being able to put all of your attention into the first step. So that you totally engage and commit to the task. And then once you finish that, you kind of naturally get pulled to the next one because you thought about it in advance. And so your mind knows where to take you.
So how do you know then what the right skills are to master? Like if you're a therapist or a psychiatrist, then how do you know that, okay, well, I need to know how to guide people through mindfulness of an emotion, say, as opposed to some people might think, well, I have to get really good at talking about the person's childhood to connect all their current.
Yeah. And so I think that that's where expertise comes. So mastery is what gives you expertise. So, and once you're very skilled at being able to deploy whatever strategies are needed for any solution, so that you can imagine a real master surgeon, whatever unexpected thing comes up in surgery, he or she is able to handle it and use the right strategy to address it. So you have to learn sometimes from others who have already achieved mastery. And what gets passed on is actually a strategy. And so when you're teaching others how to do something, you're essentially teaching them strategies, which is simply a series of steps. You're just telling them the steps to go through, and then they go and practice going through those steps. And that's how you teach people how to do therapy. It's how I teach people in OptimalWork how to mentor. You just, what's the angle you're going to be approaching this? And then you're going to learn how to break it down into steps. So I think you need mentors, you need people training you, or you find out from like the best workers around you, how do they do things? So rather than comparing outcomes, and thinking, is she ahead of me in the, the office politics or in this class, is instead, okay, I want to know exactly how she's mastered this thing. And then you try to emulate the best strategies that you find that others have.
Right. And then what you've probably seen this in mentoring of when you start something without having a strategy, what happens? And then also getting into this connects to the idea of where's your two modes of attention, and that part of the work of strategies is to train what's called the predictive attention. So maybe you can just briefly explain the two modes of attention, and then how having good strategies and aiming for mastery is then shaping those and training those so you can work at your best.
Yeah, I think that this is very exciting things, and this is more the cutting edge right now in 2020, of understanding how attention works. Because there's lots of ways of thinking about attention, and I think the best model now is looking at task attention and default attention, or what we call predictive attention. Task attention is what you use to focus entirely on the present moment. So when you're in like a conversation, that while we're talking here about these things, I'm not thinking about a shopping list. I'm not thinking about other to-do items. I'm just focused on having this conversation right here, right now. So I'm totally using my task attention. And you can think of it as like how much of my conscious awareness is employed in task attention versus in the background predictive attention. The predictive attention is in the past, in the future. It's essentially asking like, what's the most important next thing to work on? So it has to have memory. It's part of your memory. In fact, these are like the two acts of memory. One is focused on what isn't, and the other is focused on what is. And so what isn't is what needs to be prepared. So if I know that at 10:30 I'm going to be seeing someone, then already that awareness is training my predictive attention to ready everything I need for that meeting. But it's not on my mind. It's just happening in the background. And you can tell that if you got surprised by someone stopping by for an unexpected meeting, you might not be ready for it. And so it takes a little bit more to gear up. So predictive attention is what prepares the next step of what you're going to do. So that as soon as your task attention finishes the step you're on, you get ready to naturally just glide into the next one without any turbulence. So when you are practicing putting order in an hour of work by thinking ahead to the steps you're going to be going through and typing them out, like if you're making a project on OptimalWork, and then you're going to type out the steps of what you're going to do. That's essentially your task attention training your background predictive attention so that it knows how to pull you through. It's so crucial. Then your task attention, having trained this background one, can dive into the task at hand, which is being intense. So working with intensity. And then you're going to get the benefit of your predictive attention just helping you to glide through the task without turbulence. And that's constancy. So you need steps and you need training of your predictive attention so that you can glide through tasks more easily with all of your IQ actually engaging the content of the work and not having any more to think about, where do I go next? The problem when you haven't put attention into the process of working and you haven't trained your predictive attention and all you're trying to do is get something done, what now you've highlighted is a sense of progress. And you just want to feel like you're making progress in the task. But if your predictive attention doesn't exactly know what that progress is supposed to look like, it can very easily pull you to other steps that still give you a sense of progress. And then you realize after an hour or two of working that you had just gone down a rabbit hole. That's the number one way that like intelligent people, who are trying to work well, waste enormous amounts of time. They go down rabbit holes. And so they thought that they were making great progress, but it wasn't according to a strategy. And so they were making progress, but it was off the strategy. Really, it was a distraction and they didn't recognize it. The predictive attention is the source of distractions. But especially if you're just trying to get something done and progress is what you want, you're going to get pulled to what feels like progress. But if you hadn't really planned it out, you don't know if it is.
Mhm.
The other thing that often happens is that if you haven't thought about the steps you want to go through and the stop time, you're not really sure how much time the different steps should take. And sometimes you have to settle for good enough on a particular step so that you can really do the overall task very well. Like if a chef put all of his attention onto just one aspect of getting this the saute just right, and then neglected everything else, the meal would be a disaster. So
Yeah.
you have to have a sense of like how to distribute your effort over the task in the next hour. Steps tell you how essentially you're committing to say, I'm going to do 10 minutes on this and 5 minutes on this. I don't know about what your experience working with projects is like, but for me, that's hugely helpful.
Yeah, is to make sure that I'm not spending inordinate amounts of time on things that just don't matter. So yeah, I find it hugely helpful to basically any time I'm undertaking something that's going to take more than an hour, that
Mm-hmm.
I'll make a project for it and think in advance of what I want to accomplish. Like, I think, yeah, that's one of the key aspects of the strategy, right? Is that it's the strategy is thinking, what is the best way for me to accomplish my goals?
Exactly, and put
So
order
to
into it. So
think
what
of,
kind of things do you then use projects for?
mhm. Yeah, I use projects for any time I'm doing some coding.
Mm-hmm.
So we just have a new landing page now. So I made a project for that. We're also doing some writing. So now I sometimes can get into traps if a project starts getting too long. So if the project is like write a book, then I'm going to have some problems. So typically I would need to break it down into something like a discrete chunk. So maybe it's edit this chapter
Mm-hmm.
or write this chapter, because the chapters are 5 pages and it might take a couple hours.
Yeah.
So it's
Do
like a
you only
discrete
use
chunk that's a couple
projects for
hours.
work, like to
I
organize a task?
like yeah. And well, I also do it for like organizing my week or my day.
Mm-hmm.
So we have biweekly meetings to kind of schedule our priorities as a team. So then I will, right after that meeting's over, I'll go through and make a project out of all my to-do items. So then I can keep track of how my week's going too.
Yeah,
And then
so it's
I
really
start at.
anytime you're wanting to just allot how much time and attention and to get
Mhm.
an overview of a whole, could be a week, could be a task, then
Right.
you break it down into steps.
Yeah. And then the other thing I do is with the templates, is that I have certain recurring projects that I kind of do every week. So one is, for example, is to turn all of these YouTube lives or all of our into podcasts,
Mhm.
and to do all the editing around that.
And then you have
So
it right
that's something
there.
I do every week. So I have it right there. And then
Yeah.
I've noticed some improvements have needed to happen. So one week I spent a little bit too much time on getting the thumbnail image right. So, okay, now I know, okay,
Yeah.
here's a better way to do that a little bit faster.
Exactly. So then you can tweak your projects or your templates over time. So you just
Mhm.
keep improving it. And then you could
Mhm.
also share it with someone else if they had a similar task to do.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Or
I have a
yeah,
project. Yeah.
if I'm out and I can't do it that week, then I can share the strategy with someone else and they could just follow the steps pretty easily and actually
Exactly.
do it themselves.
Yeah. We're in my practice, the one I use most, I have a project for sleep.
Hmm.
And so I share that with people. And then, but those are things they do over the course of a day to kind of ensure, and we've had some sessions here on a lot of that advice. So and then it just is something that they can check through as they're going through the day to kind of make sure that they're doing all of these things that contribute then to a very good night's sleep. So the idea of the project, I think, is very flexible.
Yeah.
But essentially, it's that you know what are the steps you're going through. So it could be big things, or it could just be, how to do some specific task that is just going to take more than an hour. If it's not going to take more than an hour and it's not something you repeat a lot, then you could just do the steps in the golden hour, I think.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Another rule of thumb I use is that if ever I'm working, I always want it to be that is related to a step in a project or a golden hour in OptimalWork.
Yep.
So sometimes it will happen that I'm working on a golden hour and then I just have some idea to do something else, and then I start working on it, and then I realize, oh, okay, like there's a little bit of lack of order here, and I'm not really following a strategy. So given that I've gone off task, there was some problem. So let me think through that and think of a strategy to address this, and then update my steps if I have to. So I don't think it's a problem to be updating steps as you're kind of working through, if you notice that they can be improved.
I think the key is that as long as you're working on what the steps you've listed, it could be before the golden hour or during or after, you're still using your task attention to put order into essentially your predictive attention, so that it knows how to be pulling you through. And that always pays off. It prevents distraction, and particularly prevents rabbit holes or hyper focus, where then you're just going for a long time and wasting effort just because it feels like progress, but it's not really the strategy.
Yep. Awesome. Well, that's our time. We've gone through all the questions that we had. So any last thoughts, Kevin, on the importance of strategies or mastery?
Maybe only that mastery, this idea of like practicing and shaping strategies over time, so they just become second nature. You get very good at it. That's actually the pattern for how you grow in any virtue. That if you know you get triggered when something happens, you should think of the right strategy then to employ at that moment of triggering. So the first thing is trying to just not react according to your automated way of doing it, but to now intentionally call to mind a strategy you're going to use. So, and then you go through the steps. If you plan in advance how you want to react when you're triggered, you will grow then in that virtue that you've planned. That's exactly how it works. So every virtue, ultimately, every ideal that you master becomes a virtue. And so each of those virtues is just a form of mastery. So it's something that you've mastered over time.
That's awesome. I will try that for sure.
Great. I'll keep
awesome.
Too. Yes. Good.
Thanks, Kevin. And
till next week.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. See you next week.